Thank you for listening to Education by Design Extended Edition. In episode 5, I got to talk to John Spencer about creativity, teaching in beta, and the way project-based learning really gets to the heart of what kids are interested in and how it really helps them engage in deeper learning. In this extension episode, we take teaching in beta a step further. We're going to be thinking about approaches to teaching that help us to think of AI as a tool to help us nurture curiosity and activate skill development in the classroom. John reminds us of some really essential basics around what it means to be a teacher who engages students in their own learning. And that actually means being an authentic creative alongside students. Let's go back to where we left off.
And then it wasn't until the next year when I was unpacking stuff and reorganizing my classroom that I saw that new teacher card and, noticed that at the bottom she'd put expires and then never, right? And it was this reminder of like every year is a new year. Every group is a new group of kids, but also every day is a new day to try new lessons that may or may not work. And so to me, I think that's what teaching in beta is. It's the recognition that we will very, very rarely get 100% engagement. We will very rarely have projects that are grand slams, right? Like we're going to have a lot of swings and misses. We're going to have a lot of singles and doubles. We're going to have a lot of moments that don't work perfectly. And that is okay because our imperfection, our humanity is exactly what our students need. It's the mindset of, yes, we have those permissions. It also means we give our students that permission. And like a true beta cycle, we gather student feedback, right? We listen to our students, we gain empathy with them, and we revise based on this humble approach of saying, hey, what can I do to improve this? And then listening to our students.
I think that is that's something that Richard Hood said in the very first episode of the podcast that I did, that's sort of my job is to listen to you. It's to listen to what it is that you're interested in, what it is that you need, and to, by the end of the year, I want to be able to say to you that you have the skills that you didn't have before. I've seen you develop and grow those skills and that you matter, Like that, when you say what kids need from their teachers is just that presence of I see you and I understand that right now you need to take a walk. Go for it. Take a break, take a moment. But I think for me, teaching in beta has never been more important than, at this time, the way that education is evolving and now, artificial intelligence is just creating so much possibility for what we can do. I feel like in my life, I'm talking to it as a companion, as a thought partner. It's a companion for my inquiry. It's a companion for like helping me to think about how I might organize things differently. And I don't always agree. I interrogate, what it gives to me, obviously, but there's still, an element of fear. It's early days. And I'm sort of, I've heard in one of your episodes you were talking about kids still need to learn how to write. How does teaching in beta perhaps give us the license and the permission to sort of lower the threat a little bit when it comes to integrating technologies?
Yeah, I think it just gives you the permission to say, let's figure out what works. Let's play around with this. Let's see if this thing, is valuable. And then with that, sometimes we say, look, the lo-fi option is what I'm going with, the vintage. I remember trying a computer-based, this is years ago, a computer-based concept map program. And 5 minutes into it, saying, kids can't figure out how to use it.
This is not better.
Why not just use paper and pencil? And they made their concept maps with paper and pencil, and we busted out colored pencils, and it was amazing. It was, and the core concept was, in the end, I look at it and I go, what in all likelihood would lead to higher retention doing this by hand or on a computer. When we are in that beta mode, we have the permission to look honestly at what's going on and modify on the fly. And I think that if I felt tied to the technology, I would have just felt like I had to. We did a Wonder Day project. We called it Wonder Day, but it was a 2-class period project where they just pursued any question they wanted related to the social studies topic, engaged in research, and then did this podcast when it was done. And it had gone really well before. And so he was saying, I would love to try using a chatbot for this. My students have an option of using a chatbot on our AI platform. And it was a nightmare. The students just copied and pasted from the chatbot. They just asked questions, took everything at face value, and they were moving so quickly that they weren't paying attention. Well, that process, although frustrating, led to developing a slower, what we call the fact cycle prompt engineering process. That failed lesson led to a new framework that we could use that we then introduced 2 weeks later that turned out to be really helpful, that turned out to work. And I think on the tech side, if we had just accepted the tech on face value, or we had just rejected it and said the technology didn't work, period, we wouldn't have been able to develop a cool solution to it.
It's interesting that this little example is what's sort of illuminating how we're not quite ready for where we're going. Like the kids are going to revert to the routines that have become normalized for them in terms of how they're going to, and whether or not it was copying from the internet straight up or copying from a book back in, we copied from books when we were sort of still figuring out what we were supposed to really do.
I remember, it's so funny because people said, complaining about students copy. I remember turning in an essay and it was word for word verbatim from the Encyclopedia Britannica. We had this giant set, and that was the elite encyclopedias, that was considered the good stuff, right? But that's not new, right?
No.
Kids have been doing that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I didn't even know better. I was in 4th grade. Right? I thought this is what it meant to do research and write an essay, right? So when I think about AI, I think there's going to be these deeply human things that are done. There's going to be these aspects where we use AI to do the repetitive work we hate, right? Jump cuts and editing. There's going to be an emphasis on the human side. There's going to also be times where we use it to do things that are deeply human, and we're using it as a tool, but as a thought partner, right? And that's really exciting. I think about Ethan Mollick's notion of the cyborg and the centaur, right? We're going to use it in a very cyborg type way. And then we're also going to just abandon it completely for a while and do something just solely solo, in the same way that, someone who handcrafts furniture is now more valuable than ever. Right. And then we're going to use it in bizarre ways where we transform the learning altogether. So I think about it in this continuum of, we're going to resist it at times. We're going to integrate it at times. We're going to have times where it is offsetting what we do and separate. And then we're going to have times where we use it to really transform the learning. And that to me is exciting. It's at times terrifying. There's moments where I definitely have ethical concerns with AI. But I think we're going to enter into a really interesting space where it's not either or, right? We're going to have to be all of the above. So what happens is it's the same thing. New art forms come out because of the technology that are unexpected. Hyperrealism is the way people paint because of mirrors, right? The Dutch masters, people don't think about the technology made them better at their art form. But when photography comes out, we end up with Impressionism, we end up with Surrealism, with the Dada art movement, with all, Cubism, and all these modern art. All these art forms emerge that are, to me, really exciting, right? So the technology is going to push us to do these things that humans do very well differently, and that's exciting. And then the other thing that happened with the drum machine is it then also created new genres that use the drum machine, right? So the assumption was it's used to replace a drummer, but the reality is it leads to the explosion of hip hop, electronic music. I mean, that's ultimately it. I mean, that's ultimately the bottom line. Like, you know, when I mentioned earlier the goal of PBL, you know, it's not the finished project. It's not the finished product. You know, those are all gonna fade. That there, you know, very few products last. Like, the reality is, it's who you become. And you know, I think about me teaching in this. You know, it was a low income school, and it was a mixed group of, I had the gifted group that we talked about this before, but you know, the gifted group and the ELL group and the special ed group. And to me, the long-term value in what I see is like, where are they now? What are they doing now? How are they using those, you know, core skills that they learned? And that to me is what's exciting. You know, in the moment, there were moments where I just remember being frustrated or being sad for a kid that they tried something and it didn't work. And now I can look back on that and say, okay, well, let's look at who they've become as adults. And that's pretty exciting, you know.
You've been listening to the Education by Design podcast. I've been your host, Phil Evans. If you like this episode, please hit subscribe or follow, and join me for my next episode. And until next time, keep on learning.